Hello world, this is Stefan of Landergan Games. I've more or less now made the progress in Godot that I had previously made in Unity, which is to say that the hero is tracking down the villain, getting beaten to death, and then reviving. Every step of this latest stretch has been a bit of infuriation as I learn what processes Godot does and does not like. Nevertheless, I now have something that can be refined and expanded. Because of the frustrations, I was just happy to get beyond those and didn't initially know where to go next from here. I've now had some time to think about it, and besides some tweaks, I'm gonna fix up the combat so that the villain can take on two heroes realistically. After that, it will be time for some graphical interface. I already covered this topic long ago, but in the wake of my Neverwinter Nights ramble, I figure that revisiting it with cohesive prose would be beneficial. Before I start, here's the reason that the definition of a role-playing game is debated. Being the father of modern role-playing games, all mechanical elements of Dungeons & Dragons are popularly assumed to be role-playing elements. Of course, the mud in those waters is that Dungeons & Dragons is an offshoot of military tabletop games, so many of its elements were never really intended to inherently be role-playing elements. With that out of the way, I'll break the definition of role-playing games into its two parts, starting with role-playing. In the most concrete instance, role-playing exercises, the player acts out a character as the referee lets him know what the character can and cannot do. As the player decides the actions for the character, he learns how the decisions change the scenario. On a parallel note, as the player affects the scenario, he also affects the narrative. Hence the importance of plot in role-playing games. The three acts of a story are answers to the three questions: who is trying to accomplish what, how are they trying to go about it, and what is the result? All role-playing is done within a spectrum between player freedom and referee control, but generally speaking, the more options that the player has for Act 2, and the greater the differences in effect that the options have in Act 3, the more he has role-played. As for what is a game, it's a recreational test of skill. That one isn't hotly contested. A role-playing game, more or less, is then the test of a player's ability to change a story through making decisions for his character. Going back to Dungeons & Dragons, yes, all of it serves its role-playing, but not all of it is necessary for role-playing itself. Because Dungeons & Dragons seeks to tell a specific kind of story, namely the hero's journey. Character levels are not necessary for chaining a story, but they do define how much power the hero has acquired, allowing the referee to quell most arguments. Of course, it's not uncommon for a referee to want to prevent player interference in his meticulously crafted story, but unfortunately for him, that femme fatale was no match for my murder hobo.